Welcome to Golden Blue, everybody, home of the college football fan. And don't forget about the checklist. Hat check, sunglasses check, Pepsi check, notes check, sources check, and thick skin is a check. And don't forget to sing gear to represent your team and yourself in my background. Send it to P.O. Box 360, Liberty, South Carolina, 29657, and get yourself a shout out. On to the next video. In case you're wondering, these are the teams that we don't have represented for the mini helmets. As you can see, we actually have quite a few big brands that's not represented here at Golden Blue. So get your team represented here on Golden Blue. Hey, you already know what time it is, so might as well sit down, brace yourself, and buckle up because you are entering the speculation zone. Well, we already know that the Pac-12 is in a bad position. We've heard their offer from ESPN. We don't know what the numbers are from Apple, Amazon, or whoever else might be involved. But ESPN is most certainly lowballing the Pac-12. They're offering $90 million a year. That means $9 million per team per year if they stay at 10. So that's not even with the Pac-12 expanding. The Pac-12 is getting nervous, specifically its fans. By the way, this is not going to be a Get It Gang video idea. If you don't know what the Get It Gang is, it's basically a name that I came up with for the group of people that leave video ideas in the comment section of my videos. So if you think that you have a good video idea, leave it in the comment section of my videos, and I just might use it on my next video. So yeah, the Pac-12 fans are very, very nervous about this media deal. They really don't want it to be either exclusively streamed or substantially streaming. They want to be on linear cable, and you can't really blame them. Maybe in the future, streaming will be the main way to watch sports, but right now it's still linear cable. And ESPN, with that bad deal they're offering as far as money-wise goes, it gets worse because they only want one game a week when it comes to linear cable. So, here are some reactions, and the Big 12 might be willing to go to great extents to give Pac-12 members a lifeline to get out of the Pac-12. First up, Pac-12 Sports on Prime. And yes, take his tweets with a grain of salt, but some of his tweets have actually been correct. Says, word on the street is that ESPN is trying to work in some sort of signing bonus for Washington and Oregon if they join the Big 12. There are some legal hurdles, but it's an interesting way to entice those two while technically avoiding unequal revenue share. So they don't want to bring in Oregon and Washington and pay them on a yearly basis more than everybody else, but they are thinking, hey, why don't we give them a signing bonus, and that would entice them even more to come to the Big 12. On top of that, remember, I made a video where it's been rumored that Brett Yormark is willing to put an out clause in the Big 12 contract if the Big Ten comes to calling. So if they join the Big 12 and the Big Ten comes calling later, they wouldn't have to pay anything. Now, my opinion and a lot of my viewers' opinion is if they do that, they need to put an expiration date. So it needs to be like within the next 5 years. If the Big Ten comes to calling for you, Washington or Oregon, within the next 5 years, you can leave, no penalty involved. He also says ESPN is advising the Big 12 to waive the grant of rights for a period of time. While this would affect all new members, it is clearly designed to entice UW and UO to leave the Pac-12. The Big 12 is really trying to entice Washington and Oregon into the Big 12 from the Pac-12. Now, we know that they want to get Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and Arizona State as well. And I do think that Arizona and Colorado will jump to the Big 12. But the main brands that they would love to have in the Big 12 is Oregon and Washington. Do I think the Big 12 will actually land Oregon and Washington? It's very doubtful, but you can see that they're trying very hard to get those two brands. Todd Justice replied to Pac-12 Sports on Prime and to our favorite college football conspiracy theorist, MacGyver. Here's what he had to say. I don't know if he's correct or not, talking about MacGyver, but no school can believe it can survive on Amazon with minimal to no ESPN exposure. I love softball, but literally can't find Pac-12 softball on any legit app. Imagine that with football. It will collapse. Their sports and ADs know that. So Pac-12 fans, very nervous about this media rights deal. Not just because of the terrible money, but also the exposure. That's the main thing, exposure. I mean, it could hurt recruiting. It could hurt future hires. It could hurt everything. If nobody's watching your games, you're not getting the exposure. Even the NIL revenue, that could suffer as well. Here's a reaction from what I'm assuming is a Washington fan because of his screenshot of the title of his channel. It's from Team Stranded. The way this is heading, I'm going to need a weekly old TV guide and a $45 monthly streaming budget just to keep up with Pac-12 games. Game 1 on Apple TV. Game 2 on ESPN Plus. Game 3 on Amazon Prime. Pac-12 After Dark on Fox Sports 1. Although that last option not going to happen because Fox has backed out and they're not getting back in. It was funny whenever ESPN announced that they were actually withdrawing from this deal. A lot of rumors popped up that Fox was actually reintroduced into this deal. Fox is not interested. ESPN is still interested, but it is a low ball deal. And from what I'm hearing, either the Pac-12 has rejected it or maybe ESPN has pulled out because things are not going well. And I've said this many, many times. Every day that passes that there's no news from the Pac-12, that's bad news. The old adage is no news is good news. Well, in this particular scenario, no news is bad news. Every day that goes by, this is worse and worse and worse. And George Kliavkoff is saying nothing. And I've said this before, but I got to say it again. These presidents and athletic directors of these teams in the Pac-12, I actually feel bad for them. They're having to back this Pac-12 commissioner, hoping that he can get them a good TV deal. In the meantime, we're hearing nothing but bad news, and George Kliavkoff isn't saying anything. In the meantime, these presidents and athletic directors, they keep getting on these interviews or tweeting or whatever, and they're like, no, we're not leaving. We're hopeful that George Kliavkoff is going to pull this off and everybody's going to stay happy and we're going to stay together. In the meantime, George Kliavkoff is saying nothing. So even if the Pac-12 gets through this, and I'm going to say this many, many times, so get used to it, even if they get through this, I don't think George Kliavkoff will have a future in the Pac-12 because this is not something you want to see from your leader. They're going to have a meeting and they'll be like, George Kliavkoff, thank you for getting us through this, if they get through this. But this can't happen again. We have to move on from this. Good example was Bob Bowlesby. Bob Bowlesby did not handle the situation of the Big 12 losing members. And even though he did add some members eventually in BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF, the Big 12 was like, that was too stressful, man. Too stressful. The timing was horrible. That was too stressful. We have to move on. And that's when they got Brett Yormark in. And Brett Yormark is definitely a shark when it comes to business. He's trying to get these teams out of the Pac-12, but he's also establishing a footprint on the east side with that partnership with Rutgers Park. So he might be looking in the future to get more brands on the east side. That's the thing about Brett Yormark that I really, really like. He's thinking 5 steps ahead of everybody else. So while he's trying to get teams of the Pac-12 to strengthen the west side of the Big 12, and he wants that 4th time zone, he's also laying the foundation to get some teams on the east side. Thinking ahead. That's what you got to do to stay ahead of everything. So it's not looking good for the Pac-12. And now we're starting to see reactions from the Pac-12 fans themselves. They're not happy about this. They're nervous about this. I'm not sure if they want their teams to actually sign this deal because of the exposure. Maybe not necessarily the money itself, because as long as it's competitive with the Big 12, it's okay. But this lack of exposure, these fans are not happy with this at all. And they're starting to voice their frustration. Could this put some heat on some of these brands in the Pac-12 to be like, man, we can't do this. We can't do this. Even if the money is sort of comparable, the exposure is almost non-existent. It is time to make the jump to the Big 12. And the biggest question is, what about Oregon and Washington? We know they want to go to the Big Ten because immediately following the announcement of USC and UCLA headed to the Big Ten, they applied to the Big Ten and they were turned down. And I made a video on that yesterday on how that probably hurt the Pac-12 because they're basically broadcasting, hey, we don't want to be in the Pac-12. Something wrong is going on over here in the Pac-12 and we don't want to be here. And now it's like they're in the Pac-12 because, well, they don't have any other choice right now. So if the Big Ten continues to not really show any interest in Oregon and Washington, and this is the best deal they can get both in money and exposure, would they be willing to go to the Big 12 with these perks? With the out clause saying that, hey, if the Big Ten does come a calling, you can leave. No harm, no foul. You don't have to pay us anything. We're just thankful that you stopped by to the Big 12. And on top of that, the Big 12 is thinking about a signing bonus to add Washington and Oregon. And this would have to be agreed on by all teams. And if they want Oregon and Washington that bad, they might actually agree on it. Would Oregon and Washington be willing to jump to the Big 12, even if it's just for a short amount of time, just to get out of the mess that is the Pac-12 and then wait for the Big Ten? But not while they're still in the Pac-12, while they're in the Big 12. The Big 12 could be a stepping stone, and it looks like the Big 12 is okay with that. But would Pac-12 fans be okay with that? It looks like, well, they could be because they're not happy with this deal as far as the exposure goes. They want to be able to watch their teams on cable television without having to pay extra subscriptions. So that's something to think about. So y'all let me know in the comment section. Number 1, do you think the Big 12 really is willing to give Oregon and Washington a signing bonus if they were to join the Big 12 on top of an out clause if the Big 10 does come and call it? Number 2, if they are, do you think Oregon and Washington would actually think about this and perhaps make the move to the Big 12 in the near future? Or number 3, do you think Oregon and Washington will put up with this lack of exposure and actually stay in the Pac-12? But if they do leave the Pac-12, that could be the beginning of the end for the Pac-12, the 2 biggest brands remaining, not jumping to the Big 10, but jumping to the Big 12. So that could encourage those other brands that might be on the fence. Yeah, it's time to jump to the Big 12. Oregon and Washington are doing it. We got to do it now. That's all I got for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in my next show.